A note before this one begins. If you have followed this voice for any length of time, you know I keep a small audiobook shelf tucked into the description below. Old stories, longer stories, ones I have gathered slow. Tonight's tale rests inside that same shelf. And if you find yourself unwilling to sleep with only a screen for company, the shelf is there. Nothing pressed on you. Only offered the way a lantern is offered at a door. There are hollows in the southern Appalachians that the old maps still refuse to name. Not the new maps fill them in with contour lines and pretend. The old maps leave a smudge. And the folk who live near us still walk the long way around, even in daylight, even in July, and they still don't look up when the wind comes wrong from the ridge above the smudge. Before I tell you what happened in the fall of 1893, I want to say something first. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Just the county, if that is all you'll spare. I read every one of them, and it always surprises me how far this voice carries. Through farm kitchens and truck cabs and hospital rooms and, once, a lighthouse. Wherever you are, sit a while. Keep the door shut. Keep the lamp low. And listen to how a map got itself into the hands of a man who should have refused it and didn't. The man's name was Cordell Blackwell, 49, and if you had met him on the road that autumn you would have called him careful. He was tall, a little stooped from a bad winter in his 20s, with a beard gone gray at the corners of his mouth and eyes the color of wet flint. He wore a brown wool coat older than his youngest child and a soft dark hat with a sweatband cracked from 20 years of pulling on and off. He walked with a slight favor of the right knee, the leftover of a mule that had once stepped where it shouldn't have. He did not raise his voice. He did not spit indoors. He carried a small folding knife in his left pocket and a small folded prayer in his right, and he had never opened either one in a hurry. Cordell lived on a narrow farm 5 miles east of the North Carolina line, on the last flat shelf before the ridge started climbing in earnest. His wife had passed 9 years earlier of a slow fever that the doctor from Waynesville had named 3 different things and cured with none of them. Her name was Elsbeth, and Cordell kept her comb on the mantel, and every evening before he shut the door for the night, he touched it once with 2 fingers and said nothing at all. That was his ballast. That was the small quiet love that held the rest of him up. I want you to remember that comb. It matters later when this story ends, in a way you will not expect. He had a sister too, younger by 4 years, whose name was Naomi Fletcher, 45, married into a hard-luck family on the far side of the ridge. Naomi was thin as a fence rail and had her brother's flint-colored eyes and a laugh you would remember if you heard it once. In September of that year, she wrote Cordell a letter. Her husband had gone to Kentucky for work and had not come back. She was owing on the land, and the man who held the paper was not a patient man. She needed $40 by the first frost or she would lose the roof. She did not ask outright. Naomi never asked outright. She only said, I don't know who else to write to, brother, and I am ashamed to write to you. Cordell did not have $40. He had $11 and a coin his father had given him. He read her letter twice, folded it into a square the size of a matchbox, and put it in his coat pocket next to the small folded prayer. Then he walked to the barn and looked at the mule, and the mule looked at him, and neither of them had $40 either. That is when Ephraim Toll came up the road. Ephraim Toll, 72, was a peddler of odds and papers who came through that stretch of country every October, on his way south to Asheville. He was a small man, bent, with a face like a folded receipt, and he wore a black coat too heavy for the season and a black hat with a green stain on the brim. He drove a wagon with wheels that talked. He sold what he called papers of interest, old deeds, old letters, old sheet music, old maps, to any man who thought a piece of paper might be worth more than the ink on it. He was neither honest nor dishonest. He was, as folk in that country said, exactly what you paid him to be. Cordell went out to the road when he heard the wheels, because a man with a sister owing $40 will meet any wagon that passes. He greeted Ephraim by name. Ephraim greeted him back. They spoke a little of weather and a little of the roads, and then Ephraim said, without looking up from his sorting, I heard your sister was in a fix. News in that country traveled the way water travels, downhill and by any crack it could find. Ephraim reached into the wagon and drew out a flat wooden case, no bigger than a Bible, and inside it was a single folded sheet of paper the color of weak tea. He unfolded it on the wagon board. It was a map. Hand-inked. Brown ink. The corners softened with age. The lettering along its border was in a language Cordell did not read but recognized, Cherokee syllabary. The round-looped script that had been written down out of memory by a man named Sequoia before either Cordell or Ephraim was born. Along the bottom edge, in a different hand, in English, someone had written a date. 1889. And a name he could not quite make out, because a small tea-brown burn had gone through the last letters. I got this from a widow in Cherokee County, Ephraim said. She sold me a trunk. This was in the trunk. She would not tell me who drew it, and I did not press her, because a woman who will not tell you a thing has a reason. The map showed a stretch of country Cordell knew. He could see the shape of Balsam Ridge and the fork of Scott's Creek, and the old wagon road that came down from the gap. But there was a hollow drawn on it he had never seen on any other map. A small drop of a place, tucked behind a shoulder of the ridge, with 3 little marks around it that looked like sedge grass, or arrows or teeth. And through the drawn shape of the hollow, someone had drawn a slow, careful X. Not a cross, not a crossroad. An X, drawn twice, both strokes gone over a second time in a heavier hand. And on top of the X, in the very center of the hollow, someone had added a 4th mark. A single small looped symbol that did not belong to English and did not, as far as Cordell could see, belong to Cherokee either. It sat there like a signature nobody was meant to sign. There is gold in that hollow, Ephraim said, and shrugged. So the widow claimed. Or silver, or a still, or nothing at all. She said her father drew this map and would not tell her which. She said he was a surveyor for the state before he retired, and she said he told her once, only once, that this was the one hollow in the whole county he had not surveyed. And when I asked her why he had not surveyed it, she said, quote, because he was not meant to. Then she sold me the trunk and shut the door. Ephraim rolled the map back into its wooden case and slid it across the wagon board. $10, he said, for a piece of paper. Or for 40 if what she said was true. Cordell paid Ephraim 11 of his dollars, and one of his mother's spoons, and took the map inside the house. I want you to sit with what happened next because it did not happen fast. Cordell was not a fool. He did not saddle the mule that night. He put the map on the kitchen table, and he brought Elsbeth's comb down from the mantel and set it beside the map, and he sat with both of them for 3 hours by lamplight, the way a man might sit with 2 counselors who disagreed. The comb said nothing. The map, if I am honest, said nothing either. Only the 4th mark in the middle of the hollow seemed to have anything to say, and what it said was too quiet to make out. He decided to go and look. Only look. That is what he told himself, and I believe he meant it. The date on which he set out was the 4th day of October, 1893. He carried, in his coat, the map, the folded prayer, the small folding knife, and Elsbeth's comb. Because a man who has just made a decision he is not sure of will sometimes bring something small along that he loves. He carried on the mule a lantern, a hatchet, a coil of rope, and a canvas of hard biscuit and dry meat. He did not carry a gun. Cordell had not carried a gun since the year of the fever, and it is not our place to ask why. He rode out at the first pale light. He did not tell his sister where he had gone. He did not tell anyone. Now, I want to be careful here because the not telling is on purpose. There are pieces of what happened over the next 10 days that I could tell you plainly, and there are pieces I will not tell you plainly because the man who first told this story would not tell them plainly, and I am not going to be the one who ruins his careful silences. What I will tell you is what he told his elder cousin later on a porch in the winter of that year, when the fever of the whole thing was on him and he was trying to find a shape for it in words. I have the cousin's account in a letter copied out twice. What I have not got is the part of the account that says what the 4th mark on the map was, because Cordell would not say. That is the part one am not going to invent for you. That is his silence, and it stays his. Here is what I have. The old wagon road went as far as the fork of Scott's Creek. After the fork, Cordell had to leave the mule tied and go on foot, because the ground rose in a way that was not friendly to hooves. He tied the mule to a young birch. He touched the birch once, in the way a man will touch a horse's shoulder before he goes away and hopes to come back. Then he climbed. By late morning of the 4th day, he was at the shoulder of the ridge marked on the map. From the shoulder he could see the hollow. And here I have to stop and describe it to you the way he described it to the cousin, because everything else in this story rests on it. The hollow was smaller than the map suggested. That is the first wrong thing. It was smaller by half. A hollow in that country, drawn to that scale, ought to have been half a mile across at the mouth. This one was not 200 yards. But the map had been made by a surveyor. Surveyors do not draw a hollow twice its size by accident. The second wrong thing was the sound. There was no sound in the hollow. Cordell had lived in that country all his life. He had never in his life stood at the mouth of a wooded hollow in October and heard nothing at all.
No hay, no squirrel.
No wind. Not even the small creaking of the trees against each other that a wooded hollow does when nobody is there to listen. It was, he told his cousin, like walking into a room where a conversation had just stopped. The third wrong thing was the light. It was midday, and the light in the hollow was the light of late afternoon. Not shadow. Not dark. The color of an hour that was not the hour it was. Cordell stood at the shoulder for a long time. He did not go down. He was, remember, a careful man. He unfolded the map and held it up against the shape of the hollow, and the shape of the hollow did not match the shape of the map. The map showed a broad, soft basin. What lay below him was a narrow, deep bowl. And that fourth mark, the little looped symbol at the center, on the paper it was drawn in the very middle. In the actual hollow, standing there and looking down, Cordell could see, at the very center of the bowl, a single old dead tree. Standing upright. No other trees anywhere near it. A dead tree in the middle of a wooded hollow. Alone, with no other dead trees anywhere. That was where the fourth mark was. He went back to the mule that afternoon. He did not go down into the hollow on the fourth day. He camped at the fork of Scott's Creek that night, and he did not sleep well. And in the morning he wrote 3 lines in a small leather book he carried, and one of those 3 lines was the phrase he would come back to again and again over the next 10 days, murmuring it under his breath when the wind rose and when it did not. It was not, in the strict sense, a wind that rose that night. There was no wind. The camp at the fork was calm. A single owl called twice from the north, and then did not call again. The mule shifted its weight once, an hour before dawn, and then stood still. Cordell lay awake in his blanket and watched the small red heart of the fire he had banked go from red to gray to white to gone, and in the last watch of the night, when the fire was gone entirely and there was only the black shape of the ridge against a black sky, he heard, from the direction of the hollow, a single small dry sound, like a foot set down carefully on a leaf. Once, then nothing. He did not get up. He did not turn his head. He waited until first light, and by first light he had already made himself believe, in the small careful way a man believes things at first light, that he had heard nothing at all. 3 little marks. 3 little marks around a fourth. Say it once to yourself now. 3 little marks. 3 little marks around a fourth. Because you are going to hear it again, and I want it in your ear before the story asks it of you. On the 5th day he went down into the hollow. He carried the lantern lit, though it was midday, because the light down there was already the light of late afternoon and getting later. He carried the coil of rope over his shoulder. He carried the hatchet in his belt. He did not carry the map because he had left the map at the mule, folded in the wooden case weighted with a stone. This will matter. The hollow floor was soft. The soft of a floor that had never been walked. Not the soft of leaves. The soft of ground that had never known a boot. He noted that. He was not a man who missed a thing. He went toward the dead tree. Halfway there, he stopped because he saw something that would not resolve in his mind. There was ground disturbed on the uphill slope of the bowl. Fresh-turned earth in a long, low line, the width of a grave and twice its length. But there were no tracks in the soil around it. Not human, not animal. The ground had been turned, and nothing had gone in or out to turn it. Cordell did not go closer to the disturbed ground. He went on toward the dead tree, because a man will sometimes finish the errand he came for even after he has learned the errand is wrong. The dead tree was a chestnut, or had been. Chestnut blight had not yet come to that country in 1893, so this tree was dead of something else. There was no bark on it. There were no leaves. It stood 12 feet tall and no higher. Around its base, half buried in the soft floor, were 3 flat stones set in a rough triangle. 3 little marks around a fourth. And in the space between the 3 stones at the foot of the dead tree was a small square opening in the ground. Not a well, not a shaft, a square, cut clean, about 2 feet on a side, dark inside. Cordell knelt at the edge of the square. He lowered the lantern into it on the rope. The rope went 12 feet. The lantern touched nothing. The rope went 20 feet. The lantern touched nothing. The rope went 30 feet, which was all the rope he had, and the lantern touched nothing. He drew the rope up. The lantern was still lit. He touched the side of it. The lantern was cold. He backed away from the square opening. He did not turn his back on it. He walked backward until he was outside the ring of 3 stones, and then he turned and walked to the mouth of the hollow, and he climbed out the way he had come in, and he did not run because he was a careful man. But his hand was on the hatchet at his belt, and he had not put it there on purpose, and when he noticed his hand there at the mouth of the hollow, he did not take it away. He climbed the shoulder with the hatchet in his hand. He did not know what he thought he was going to strike with it. He only knew that the weight of the wooden handle in his palm was, in that hour, the only thing in the world that felt as it should feel, and he was not going to give it up until he was well back on the far side of the ridge. At the shoulder of the ridge he stopped and looked back. The hollow was as it had been. Small, silent, wrongly lit. The dead tree at the center, thin and pale as a bone. 3 little marks. 3 little marks around a fourth. He went back to the fork of Scott's Creek. The map was where he had left it, weighted with the stone. But the wooden case was open. He had left it closed. He looked around the ground for tracks and found none. That night he did not sleep at all. He sat up with the map open across his knees, staring at the 4th mark. He did not touch Elsbeth's comb. He was ashamed, he told his cousin later, to touch it with the hand that had held the rope. On the 6th day he did not go into the hollow. He rode to the nearest town, a place called Little Fork 3 hours off, and he asked after an old man he had heard of once, an old man who was said to know things. He had heard of the old man, first, from a circuit preacher who had died the winter before. The preacher had said, at a supper Cordell had attended in his own kitchen, that if a man of that country ever found himself with a question that the county records could not answer, the man to ask was old Asaph Wren of Little Fork, and that the asking should be done in person and slowly and never by letter. Cordell had not, at the time, expected to have such a question. He had remembered the preacher's advice anyway, the way he remembered most things men had told him. He kept a small stock of other men's warnings, unopened, in the back of his head. He opened this one now. The old man's name was Asaph Wren, 78, a widower who lived alone at the top of Little Fork in a house painted the color of dry moss. He had, in his time, been the county's last unofficial cartographer, and before that he had walked with the Cherokee elders, and before that he had been a small boy who watched his own father die of a snake bite on a section of ground that was not on any map. Folks said Asaph Wren knew every hollow in 3 counties. Cordell found him on his porch, weaving a splint basket with hands the color of oak. Asaph did not look up. Cordell said his name. Asaph nodded. Cordell said he had come with a question. Asaph said, "Then sit." Cordell laid the map on the porch boards between them. He did not touch the 4th mark with his finger. He only laid the map flat and waited. Asaph looked at the map for a long time. His eyes were pale, watered by age, and they moved across the paper the way a man's eyes move across a face he half recognizes. Then he closed his eyes for a while, and then he opened them, and then he said, "Quiet, where'd you get this?" Cordell told him. Asaph nodded, slow. "The widow, the surveyor's daughter." "Yes. He was a friend of mine, her father. He would not have drawn this if he had a choice." Cordell waited. Asaph put the basket down. He put his hand, a hand knobbed with knuckles like river stones, on the edge of the map, gently, as a man puts a hand on the edge of a sleeping animal. He said, "The 3 marks around it are old. Older than the map. Older than the ink. They are on stones down in that hollow, and they were there before anybody in this county could write them down. The 3 marks mean, in the way old things mean, we 3 have agreed. We 3 watch. We 3 keep. That is one meaning. There are others I do not know." Cordell said, and the fourth mark. The one in the middle. Asaph did not answer for a long time. He looked at the porch boards and at the map and at his hands. Then he said, the fourth mark is not a mark to name. If I told you the meaning of the fourth mark, I would be adding my name to a paper my friend did not want any name added to. I will not do that. I will tell you this instead. If you have gone down into that hollow already, you have taken something out of it. You may not know what. It may not look like anything. It may look like nothing but a little dust on your coat, or a small sound you hear at night that you cannot place. But you have taken something out because that is how the fourth mark works. And if you have taken something out, you will have 10 days from the day you went down to give it back. Not 11. 10. Cordell said, 9 now. 9 days from tomorrow. Asaph looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, then you had best not waste the 9th day, or the 8th, or the 7th. And then he said, more quiet, I am sorry, Cordell. I did not know it was you. Let's go back to the story. I want to ask you something before we do. Have you ever known, in your body, that something was wrong before you had a name for it? A room you would not enter. A road you would not take at night. A stranger who spoke pleasantly and left the taste of iron in your mouth. If you have, a piece of what Cordell felt riding home from Asaph Wren's porch. And if a story like that lives in your own family. A hollow, a stretch of road, a house nobody's owned since the war. Tell me. I read every comment that comes to this channel, and one of the stories you send might just become the next one I tell. Now, Cordell rode home on the 6th day. He came home by a route he did not usually take, which added an hour to the ride because he realized halfway along it, avoiding a stretch of road that ran nearer to the shoulder of Balsam Ridge than any other. He had never before in his life avoided a road for its nearness to a hollow. He noted that about himself. He did not like what he noted. At home, he tended the mule. He drew water. He split 3 days' kindling and stacked it inside against the wall by the stove. He fed Pauper, 12 years old and half-blind in the left eye, who had watched him unsaddle without rising from his patch of sun on the porch and who did not eat what Cordell put down for him. Cordell noticed. He did not press the dog. He set the food back on the shelf. He sat on the porch step and let Pauper lay his gray muzzle across his knee, and he did not stroke the dog, only rested his hand near the dog's shoulder, and for a while neither of them moved. The sun went down behind the ridge. The color of the light did not, that evening, do anything wrong. Cordell noticed that too. He was, by then, noticing everything. On the 7th day, he did not go back to the hollow. He sat at the kitchen table with the map open and Elsbeth's comb beside it, and he thought. He was not a man given to acting when thinking would still do. His hound, a red tick named Pauper, 12 years old, half-blind in the left eye, sat at his feet, and along about noon Pauper stood up without reason and walked to the door and lay down against it with his back to the room. Pauper would not come away from the door for the rest of the day. He would not eat. He would not drink. He kept his back to the room and his nose to the crack under the door. On the 8th day Cordell rode out again. He carried the lantern, the rope, the hatchet, and this time the map. He carried Elsbeth's comb in his inside pocket, and it is important that you know he did carry it, because he had told himself the day before that he would not. He came to the fork of Scott's Creek by mid-afternoon. He tied the mule to the same young birch. He touched the birch. He climbed. He came to the shoulder of the ridge. He looked down. The hollow was different. The dead tree at the center was no longer alone. Around it, in the same rough triangle as the 3 flat stones, there were now 3 saplings. Small, perhaps waist-high. They had not been there 4 days ago. They were leafed out, in October, in a hollow whose light was already the light of late afternoon. They were leafed out in the wrong color, a green so dark it read as black. Cordell stood at the shoulder for a long time. He was, remember, a careful man. He had 8 days left. Asaph Wren had said 10 from the day he went down, and he had gone down on the 5th, so tomorrow was the 10th day. His careful plan was to camp at the fork that night, sleep, and go down at first light on the 9th day, with the whole of the 9th and part of the 10th to give back what he had taken, whatever it was. But at the shoulder of the ridge on the 8th day he did something he did not plan. He heard, from the hollow below, a sound. A single small sound. The scrape of something soft against something hard. And Popper, who had been at the door of the house for 24 hours and would not eat, was suddenly beside him at the shoulder of the ridge. The dog had followed him. The dog had never followed him before without being called. The dog's back was up. The dog was making, low in his throat, a sound Cordell had never heard him make. The dog went down the shoulder toward the hollow. Cordell called him. The dog did not come. Cordell went down after him. The light in the hollow was later than it had been. Not late afternoon now, early evening, in a place where it should have been mid-afternoon. The 3 saplings around the dead tree stood black-green and still. The 3 flat stones sat in their triangle. The small square opening at the foot of the dead tree was still there. Dark inside. Popper had stopped at the ring of stones. He was facing the square opening. His back was up. He was not barking. Cordell walked to the ring of stones. He knelt at the edge of the square opening. He took Elsbeth's comb from his inside pocket. He held it in his hand. He did not know what he had taken out of the hollow. Asaph Wren had said he might not know. He had brought the comb because the comb was the smallest thing he owned that he loved. And he thought, or he had told himself on the ride home from Little Fork, that if he did not know what he had taken out, he might have to give in exchange the thing that would be most missed if it were gone. He held the comb over the square opening. He did not drop it. And here I want to tell you something about that moment, because it is the moment I keep coming back to when I sit with this story late at night. Cordell had brought the comb because he did not know what he had taken. He had thought, on the ride home from Little Fork, that if he did not know what he had taken, he would have to give in exchange the thing that would be most missed if it were gone. That was a fair bargain, in the arithmetic of a careful man. But standing at the ring of 3 stones with the comb held over the square opening, Cordell realized something he had not, until that moment, realized. He realized that the comb was not the thing most missed if it were gone. The comb was the thing that missed. It was a small piece of the world that had loved his wife back, in the small mute way an object can love a person. And to drop it into the square opening would not be to give the hollow the thing that missed most. It would be to give the hollow the thing that remembered most. He did not know, in words, that this was what he had realized. He knew only that his hand would not open. I want you to know that. He did not drop it. He held it and he looked at it and he thought of Elsbeth and of Naomi and of Popper and of the $11 and the 1 spoon, and he did not drop the comb. He put it back in his inside pocket and he stood up and he stepped away from the square opening. He turned to Popper. Popper was gone. The dog had been at the ring of stones a moment before. Cordell had, in the corner of his eye, seen the flat white flag of the dog's back. The black-flecked ears drooped low, the muzzle pointed at the square opening. Now the space where the dog had been was only ground. Not disturbed ground. Not turned ground. Only the soft, never-walked floor of the hollow, unmarked. There was no place in the ring for the dog to have gone. There was no place outside the ring, at the distance Popper had been, where a dog could have gone. In the 2 heartbeats Cordell had looked away. Cordell had not heard the dog move. There was no sound in the hollow. There had never, since he entered it the first time on the 5th day, been any sound in the hollow except his own. Popper had been at the edge of the ring of stones one moment. He was gone the next. Cordell called him. He did not shout. Careful men do not shout in places where no shout has ever come back. He said the dog's name 3 times, in the register of a man asking a favor. There was no answer. Cordell walked around the ring of 3 stones once. He walked around it twice. He walked around it a 3rd time. In the space between the 2nd and 3rd circuits, the light in the hollow shifted from early evening to true dusk. In the space between the 3rd circuit and his decision to leave, it shifted from dusk to a color that was not any hour in any day. He left the hollow. He climbed the shoulder of the ridge. He did not run. When he reached the shoulder, he looked back. The 3 saplings around the dead tree were taller. He was sure of it. He was not going to say so later to his cousin, but he was sure of it. They were taller by a foot, in the time it had taken him to leave. He went back to the mule. The mule was calm. The mule had not heard anything. He rode. He camped that night at the fork of Scott's Creek, and he sat up all night with the lantern lit, and he wrote in the small leather book, twice, 3 times, until the ink stopped flowing. 3 little marks. 3 little marks around a 4th. On the 9th day he went back down into the hollow with a shovel. He had come to a decision in the night, and I am going to tell you what the decision was, because it is not the decision that Asaph Wren had suggested. Asaph had said, "Give back what you took." Cordell did not know what he had taken, but he had come to think, in the night, that what he had taken was not a thing but a knowing. He had gone down on the 5th day, and he had seen the square opening, and he had lowered the lantern on the rope, and he had learned, in a way he could not undo, that the opening did not have a bottom. That knowing was what he had taken out of the hollow. And a knowing, once out, cannot be put back in. But it can be sealed over. He carried a shovel on the 9th day. He carried the hatchet. He carried the rope. He did not carry the lantern, because in the hollow now the light was late afternoon light regardless of when he stood in it, and the lantern seemed a kind of insult he did not want to offer twice. He carried Elsbeth's comb, because he had not been able to leave it home. He went down the shoulder. He came to the ring of 3 stones. The dead tree at the center was still standing. The 3 saplings around it were now as tall as he was. Their black-green leaves did not move in any wind, because there was no wind. The square opening at the foot of the dead tree was still there, still dark inside. He knelt at the edge of the square opening. He looked into it once. He did not lower anything into it, and then he began to shovel. He shoveled the soft floor of the hollow into the square opening. He shoveled for 2 hours. The soft floor did not run out, though the ring of the 3 stones grew a little wider as he worked, because he was taking earth from the inside of it. He shoveled until the square opening was level with the ground. Then he laid the flat side of the shovel across it and pressed the earth flat. He did not, while he shoveled, look up at the 3 saplings. He did not, while he shoveled, look at the dead tree in the center. He kept his eyes on the blade of the shovel and on the soft floor and on the square opening. He counted his shovelfuls. He reached 100 and then 200, and then he stopped counting because the counting had become a way of not thinking, and he did not want to stop thinking. He wanted, in fact, to think very carefully about what he was doing so that he could remember it later, and so that he could tell himself later that he had done it on purpose. He stood up. The dead tree at the center was gone. It had not fallen. It was gone in the way a candle is gone. The 3 saplings around it were still there. They were now the height of a man, and their black-green leaves did not move. Cordell walked around the ring of 3 stones once. He did not walk around it twice. He climbed out of the hollow. He came to the shoulder of the ridge. He turned and looked back. Something in the hollow moved. I will not tell you what. Cordell did not tell his cousin what. He told his cousin only that he saw the thing move, once at the center of the ring of 3 stones, where the dead tree had been. He told his cousin he did not stay to see it move a second time. He came down the shoulder to the fork of Scott's Creek. The mule was gone. The mule had not broken its lead. The lead was still tied to the young birch. The mule was gone from inside the lead, the way Popper had been gone from inside the ring of stones. Cordell walked home. Took him a day and a half. He arrived on the afternoon of the 10th day. He arrived at his own kitchen door and found it open. He had not left it open. He stepped inside and stood in the kitchen and looked around, and nothing was gone. The comb, Elsbeth's comb, he took from his inside pocket and set on the mantel where it had always been. The map, the tea-brown map with the 4th mark and the 3 little marks around it, he laid flat on the kitchen table. He looked at it. The 4th mark was not on it. He looked closer. He turned the map over. He held it up to the light of the kitchen window. The 4th mark was gone. The 3 little marks around where it had been were still there in their triangle. In the center, where the 4th mark had been, there was nothing at all. Not a smudge, not a scrape, not a hole in the paper. Only clean tea-brown paper, as if the mark had never been. He folded the map and put it away in a drawer. The next morning he wrote Naomi a letter. He told her he could not send the $40. He told her he was sorry. He did not tell her why he could not send it. He did not tell anyone about the hollow or the map or the dead tree or the dog or the mule or the square opening or the fourth mark except once, months later, to his elder cousin on a porch in the winter of that year, when the fever of the whole thing was on him. And here is where the story would end, if the story ended when the man went home. It does not end there. In the spring of 1894, 6 months after Cordell walked out of the hollow, a survey team came through that country on behalf of the state. They had been sent to update the county maps. They were 3 young men from Raleigh in sober coats. They spoke to Cordell on his porch. They asked him if he knew of any features in the country not on the current maps. Cordell said no. They asked if he had ever heard of a hollow behind the shoulder of Balsam Ridge. Cordell said no. They thanked him politely. They rode on. 2 weeks later, one of the young men rode back. He was pale and thinner than he had been. He sat on Cordell's porch and drank a cup of black coffee and did not, for a long time, speak. Then he said, "Quiet, Mr. Blackwell. There is no hollow behind that shoulder of Balsam Ridge. The land is flat there. We walked the ground. We measured the ground. There is no hollow." Cordell said, "Then the maps are right." The young man from Raleigh said, "The maps do not show a hollow there either. I know that. I am not saying anything is missing. I am saying we walked over a piece of ground that felt wrong, and I would like to know if any of the older folk hereabouts have said anything about it." Cordell said no. The young man from Raleigh looked at him for a long moment. Then he set his cup down carefully on the porch board and said, "There is a widow in Cherokee County who says her father drew a map of it once. When we went to her house to ask, she was dead. She had been dead 9 days. Nobody in the county was quite sure who had been closest to her, so nobody had been by to check. There was no map in her house. The trunk her father had left her was gone." Cordell said, "I am sorry to hear it." He said it flat. He did not offer more. A careful man does not offer more when a stranger has come to his porch with a piece of news that half fits the shape of a piece of news the careful man already carries. The young man from Raleigh said yes. He looked at his coffee for a while. Then he said, "There was a peddler seen at her door the week she died. An old peddler in a black coat and a black hat with a green stain. He was not seen leaving." Cordell said nothing. The young man rode away that afternoon and Cordell did not see him again. Cordell lived 19 more years. He was a careful man and he grew a little more careful as he aged. He never went back to the shoulder of Balsam Ridge. He never spoke of the hollow again after the winter, he told his cousin. He sent Naomi money when he had it and she lost the farm anyway, and moved in with him in the winter of 1897, and lived with him until his death in 1912. She kept house for him. She learned that on the anniversary of the 4th day of October each year, her brother would sit up in the kitchen through the night with the lamp turned low. He would not go to bed. She learned not to ask. He did one small thing every night of his remaining life. Every night, before he shut the door for the night, he touched Elsbeth's comb on the mantel with 2 fingers, the way he always had. And then, and this is the part Naomi wrote down in her own hand, in a family Bible that is still, as of the writing of this account, in the possession of a great-granddaughter in Sylva, North Carolina. He touched the mantel one more time, in the empty space beside the comb, and he said, quiet enough that even she was not always sure of the words, 3 little marks. Every night, for 19 years, until his last. Naomi wrote, in that same family Bible, that in the last winter of his life her brother had begun to say the words a second time. Not louder, not more urgent, only twice. He would touch the comb, touch the empty space beside it, say the phrase, breathe once, and say it again. She thought at first he was forgetting the first saying, the way old men forget. She realized, by the 3rd night of it, that he was not forgetting. He was answering himself. Cordell Blackwell died in the fall of 1912, of a pneumonia that took him quickly, and Naomi found him in the kitchen chair, at the table, with the drawer open beside him and the tea-brown map spread across his knees. She looked at the map before she called anyone. The 3 little marks were still on it, in their triangle. In the middle, in the empty center, there was a small dark smudge she did not remember. She could not tell if it was ink or dust or something worse. She folded the map and put it back in the drawer and did not look at it again. Naomi Fletcher lived in Cordell's house until her own death in 1929. Every night, before she shut the door, she touched Elsbeth's comb on the mantel with 2 fingers, the way her brother had. And then she touched the mantel one more time, in the empty space beside the comb, and she said, "Quiet, 3 little marks." She did this every night for 17 years. Her great-niece, who lived with her at the end, remembered it. Her great-niece is the great-granddaughter in Silva. The map is still in a drawer in that house. The house is still standing. The mantel is still there. The comb is still on it. Nobody has moved the comb since 1912. And every night, before the last person to bed in that house shuts the door, they touch the comb with 2 fingers, and then they touch the empty space beside it, and they say, "Quiet, 3 little marks." They do not know half the time why they do it. They only know that in their family, that is how the day is closed. The shoulder of Balsam Ridge is still there. The ground behind it is still, by every map, flat. Hikers come through occasionally. Most of them notice nothing. A few of them come out saying the light behind the shoulder is the wrong color for the hour. A very few come out and will not say what they saw. Nobody has drawn a new map of it. Nobody has needed to. There is a young woman in North Carolina, a folklorist by trade, who has spent the last 3 years collecting stories from Jackson and Swain and Haywood counties. She wrote to me last spring. She asked if I would look into a story a great-granddaughter in Silva had told her, a story about an old Cherokee inked map, and a peddler in a black coat and a hollow behind a ridge that does not, by any current instrument, exist. She said the great-granddaughter had shown her the mantle. She said the great-granddaughter had shown her the comb. She said the great-granddaughter would not open the drawer. That is the story I have got. If you have got a story from your own hollow, from your own county, your own family, your own back road, tell me. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and tell me what your people know that the maps refuse to say. One of your stories may become the next one I tell. There is a well in a town in eastern Kentucky that I have been reading about for the better part of a year. Now, nobody in that town draws from it. Nobody in that town will say why. There is a family who owns the land the well sits on, and every 3rd generation, a child in that family is born knowing the well's true name, and every 3rd generation that child refuses to tell it. I am going to walk down into that town in the way I walked down into this hollow with Cordell tonight, and I am going to bring you the story. I do not know yet what the child will not say. I know only that the well, like the hollow, has been quiet a long time, and that quiet places have a way of holding what they hold until the wrong careful man comes along. Until then, mind the mark you cannot name.